Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. Get updates to the forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. You can also call our weather info line at 1-800-472-0391. Get updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, I want to talk about an update to the outage that we have for the Pedro Dome radar. That's the one that services the greater Fairbanks area. We had that out for maintenance to extend the lifetime of that radar beginning on September 14th and going through September 24th. However, we do need to extend the time frame that is going to be under maintenance. So it is going to be out until October 2nd. So the new dates are September 14th all the way through October 2nd to make sure that we can do that service to the radar and make sure that all of the pedestal is replaced properly with that so that this radar can last for another 25 years. And it should be known, though, that this won't degrade the service of the Fairbanks Forecast Office for the area. We'll have to maybe look at some extra tools and resources, but we will be able to provide same quality of service as always for the area. Looking out at the temperatures in the Fairbanks area, as we had the frost advisory out, we did have temperatures, as you can see, dropping to many areas right around freezing, but several areas such as Goldstream Creek dropping well into the lower 20s. Salcha also down to 24 degrees, and Circle Hot Springs all the way down to 18 degrees, so quite a bit cooler than what we have been seeing for a lot of the last month or so in the Fairbanks area that we saw overnight last night. For a quick climate update for the southeastern portions of the state, this is the mid-September climate summary. Notice with the temperatures, we haven't seen a lot of variation from normal. Quite a few places like Yakutat and Sitka are within 1/10 of a degree from normal. Ketchikan a little bit warmer than what would normal be, 3.7 degrees above normal. However, there is a big difference in precipitation. It's been quite a bit more dry in these locations than what would be normal, with several places down below 2 inches below normal, Yakutat and Sitka, and Ketchikan 4 inches below normal for a mid-September time frame. So it has been quite a bit drier in our climate, but the temperatures haven't been very different with the exception of the more southern locations of the Panhandle. Taking a look at the advisories that we have out coming up, we have 2 frost advisories out. Similarly to last night, the Yakutat area has a frost advisory and the Haines area. Now the Haines one is more specifically for the Haines Highway and areas further to the north, closer to the border. And we do have the frost advisory out from 2 a.m. until 8 a.m. on Monday. Taking a look now at our satellite imagery, we'll focus on our low pressure system that's out west. You can see that the low center itself is not moving a whole lot, but as we watch this again, you can watch the frontal system pushing more cloud cover and precipitation further to the north. However, the eastward progression of this system is not very much, as we can tell that we have high pressure out over mainland Alaska, stalling this system out over the eastern portions of the Bering Sea and not allowing a lot of that cloud cover and rain to make it to the mainland as of yet. Down in the Panhandle area, we can also see quite a bit of clearing, not a lot of cloud cover over many locations down there. Pretty nice weather for much of the eastern half of the state. As we look at the weather for the remainder of the day, we can see our low out over the western Bering with its front draped through the central and eastern portions of the Bering Sea, crossing over the Pribilof Islands and down near the eastern Aleutians. We're seeing some lighter showers behind the front out over the central and western portions of the Bering and Aleutians, and then some heavier rain for the eastern Aleutians, Pribilof Islands, and then pushing up towards the St. Lawrence Island area, with some of the rain making it to the YK Delta coast as well as the Seward Peninsula. We're also going to start to see fog north of the Seward Peninsula, and that fog is going to extend up along the Arctic coastline, where we'll start to see a mixture of rain and fog from the Wainwright area further to the east. But high pressure dominating the remainder of mainland Alaska, keeping some nicer, clear skies for many locations, and down into the Panhandle as well. As we look into tonight, high pressure continues to dominate through the Gulf, through south central Alaska, and much of the eastern portions of the mainland, with high pressure near the Panhandle area as well, keeping all of these areas dry through the nighttime hours. Up along the Arctic coastline, we are going to continue to see the mixture of rain and fog, and then we'll start to see some snow as we get into the Brooks Range. Along the west coast of the state, continuing to see where our old frontal boundary have been bringing up all the moisture from the south, bringing a mixture of rain and fog from the Point Hope area down through the Norton Sound area. Our new low is going to have formed off of the old boundary south of the Pribilof Islands, bringing more rain to the eastern Aleutians, Pribilof Islands, and for the Alaska Peninsula. Behind this system, we have our low out over the western Bering, continuing to bring rain showers to the remainder of the Bering Sea and western Aleutian Islands. As we move into Monday, that low is going to still spin in place, continuing to bring rain to the western and central Aleutians, as well as areas around the Bering Sea. And our other system is bringing a front closer towards the west coast of the state, starting to move a little bit more of that rain inland as our high pressure is slowly pushing off to the east, allowing some of the rain to push through much of southwest Alaska, throughout the Seward Peninsula area, up through the Kotzebue Sound area, and into the western portions of the Brooks Range. Higher elevations, we do expect to see some snow in the Brooks Range, and then a mixture of rain and fog along the Arctic coastline. We'll also see that rain and fog through the Kotzebue and Norton Sounds. Then that high pressure is going to keep much of the remainder of the interior dry, including south central Alaska and down into the Panhandle area. As we look into Tuesday, that high pressure is finally pushing off further to the east, still going to keep the Panhandle with fair weather, but that frontal system is now being allowed to push inland over southwest Alaska, bringing rain throughout Kodiak Island area up into southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula, and rain throughout southwest Alaska, well into the western interior, well past Galena area, up through much of the central Brooks Range, where we'll start to see some snow at the higher elevations, rain and fog from the Kotzebue Sound area up along the west coast, and then fog along the Arctic coastline. Behind this system, we'll see some showers moving in through much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands to include the Alaska Peninsula, and our other low is finally dropping further to the south, near to the western Aleutians as it begins to fill and is approaching the 996 millibar level. Taking a look at our temperatures for Monday morning, staying out in the Aleutian Islands, temperatures dropping down to the mid-40s. Right around 50 degrees is expected for the Alaska Peninsula, and in the 40s for the Bristol Bay area, with 48 for Dillingham, 46 for Iliamna, and 43 for King Salmon. The rest of southwest Alaska is going to be in the mid to upper 40s, with the exception of the Kipnik area only dropping down to 51 degrees, a little bit warmer there. For the Seward Peninsula area, in the 40s is expected, as well as 46 at Gamble. And then Kotzebue Sound area in the mid-40s as well. Up along the Arctic coastline, dropping down into the mid to upper 30s. And then down in the interior, it's going to get progressively colder as we get further to the east, with Arctic Village being the coldest, 29 degrees for that area. Down in south central Alaska, we're going to see temperatures in the 40s as we get nearest to the water, and dropping down into the 30s and even to 27 degrees at Glen Allen. 43 degrees is expected low for Kodiak Island, and then down in the Panhandle, we're going to see primarily warmer temperatures further to the south in the 40s, with colder temperatures near freezing as we get further to the north. We will have the Skagway area staying a little bit warmer, only getting down to 46 degrees. As we move to Monday afternoon, those high temperatures getting up to near 70 degrees for the southern locations of the Panhandle, getting up into the lower to mid-60s as we get further to the north. In south central Alaska, temperatures getting up into the upper 50s at most locations, Talkeetna getting up to 60 degrees. In the interior portions of the state, mid-50s are expected throughout the area, with 55 at Galena, and then in the mid to upper 50s as we push down into southwest Alaska, with McGrath getting up to 60 degrees, and then around 50 degrees for the Seward Peninsula area, and up around 40 degrees for much of the Arctic coast, getting a little bit warmer as we go further to the west. And then down in the Panhandle, or the Alaska Peninsula area, into the mid-50s is expected, and lower to mid-50s for the Aleutian Islands and Pribilofs. Low temperatures for Tuesday morning, dropping down into the mid-40s for the Aleutian Islands, down around 50 degrees for the Bristol Bay area, mid to upper 40s for much of the rest of southwest Alaska and the western portions of the interior, dropping down into near 40 for the central locations of the interior, and then to the 30s for the eastern locations. Out by the Seward Peninsula area, mid-40s is expected, and then along the Arctic coastline, staying above freezing in most locations, but dropping down well into the mid-30s. Down in south central Alaska, and the mid-40s is expected, and then northern locations of the Panhandle, upper 30s to near 40, and then in the 40s for the southern locations. Afternoon highs for Tuesday in the 60s for the Panhandle area, warmer as we get further to the south. Mid to upper 50s for south central Alaska, southwest Alaska, and much of the interior. into the 40s for much of the Arctic coastline, and right around 50 degrees for the Seward Peninsula. As we drop down to the Alaska Peninsula, mid to upper 50s is expected, and lower to mid 50s for much of the Aleutian Islands, with 54 degrees expected for Pribilof Islands to include St. Paul.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start off with a look at our flying weather on Monday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we have MVFR and IFR conditions. A lot more IFR conditions around where our old front was. That's pushing through into the eastern portions of the Bering Sea, bringing up some IFR conditions for the eastern Aleutian Islands and the Alaska Peninsula. Much of mainland Alaska is expected to be VFR, as well as down in the Panhandle. However, the west coast, as we have our front starting to push in, is going to bring some MVFR conditions along the coastline, and then we're going to have MVFR and IFR conditions through the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coast. As you look into Monday afternoon, some of those conditions are going to clear up along the Arctic coastline, leaving just some MVFR conditions near the water and over the western portions of the Brooks Range. Down the west coast of the state, still going to see some MVFR and IFR conditions pushing a little bit further inland now, and we're going to have MVFR conditions through much of the Bering Sea and Aleutians, with IFR conditions for those eastern locations, to include the Alaska Peninsula. Out over the remainder of mainland Alaska and the Panhandle, expecting to see continued VFR conditions. Moving into Tuesday morning, still VFR for the Panhandle area. Most of South Central will also remain VFR. However, some of those MVFR are starting to sneak in from the west, making their way into the southern portions of the Kenai Peninsula and for Kodiak Island. Up through the interior, primarily VFR conditions, but as we get into the Brooks Range, some MVFR conditions will be expected, and a mixture of MVFR and IFR along the Arctic coastline. Down the west coast of the state, MVFR conditions are pushing a little bit further towards the mainland part of the state, and some IFR conditions along the coastline. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutians, primarily MVFR conditions. Into Tuesday afternoon, all the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands expected to be MVFR, with MVFR conditions pushing into western portions of mainland Alaska and all along the west coast as well. Primarily VFR along the Arctic coastline, with just some areas of MVFR up by the very northern portions by Utqiagvik. In the eastern portions of the interior, expected to see VFR conditions, as well as much of South Central. However, Kenai Peninsula is starting to see more MVFR conditions Tuesday afternoon. And then VFR conditions expected to remain for the Panhandle. For our passes, starting up north in the Brooks Range, going to start off IFR but improve to VFR in the afternoon, as well as at Adigan Pass. Lake Clark and Merrill both expected to be VFR throughout the day Monday, as well as Rainy Pass, Windy Pass, and Isabel Pass. Moving further to the east in the Alaska Range, Mentasta Pass also going to be VFR throughout the day, as well as Tanita Pass and Portage Pass. Then Chilkoot and White both expected to be VFR all day on Monday. Taking a look at our freezing levels, we have some of those surface freezing lines, but that's primarily for the mountains of the Brooks Range and down in the Wrangell, St. Elias, and Alaska Range. However, we have our 2,000-foot freezing level pushing in over northern portions of the Arctic coastline, and then we have some warmer air coming up towards the Kodiak Island and Alaska Peninsula area with freezing levels as high as 12,000 feet just to the south of Kodiak Island. Another area of colder air being pulled down from our low out over the Bering Sea, dropping down to 4,000 feet over the central portions of the Bering. Taking a look at our icing now, we have areas below or above 5,000 feet over western portions of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, above 8,000 feet as we near the St. Lawrence Island area, above 5,000 feet over western portions of the Brooks Range and northwestern parts of the state in general, and then above 2,000 feet as we move off towards areas near Kaktovik and to the east. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is going to move in out of a southwesterly direction over the eastern portions of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands at 130 knots. Moving over our ridging out over the state, we're going to see some winds up to as high as 100 knots out of a northwesterly direction near the northeastern portions of the state, and it's going to dip back down into the Gulf of Alaska as high as 105 knots to 115 knots out over the Gulf out of a northerly direction. 75 knots, however, over the Panhandle area. Looking down to 9,000 feet, circulation around our low pressure system, northerly winds 35 knots on the west side of the low. As we move towards the western Aleutians out of a southwesterly direction, 30 knots there. Stronger winds near the eastern Aleutian Islands, 50 knots out of a southwest direction, dropping down as we get over the Bristol Bay area to around 30 knots, 45 knots out over the YK Delta area, and then some winds out of the west, 30 knots over the eastern portions of the interior. Down at 3,000 feet, winds around our low pressure system again up to as high as 45 knots out of a northerly direction on the west side of the low, around 40 knots as we get towards the western Aleutian Islands, 25 knots closer towards the central Aleutians, 40 knots out of a southwesterly direction for the Alaska Peninsula, and up the west coast of the state also going to see winds around 40 knots. Pretty calm over much of mainland Alaska, and in the eastern portions of the Gulf, northeasterly winds 20 knots are expected. Looking at our turbulence, with some of those stronger winds moving up the west coast of the state, we do have some turbulence below 4,000 feet for the Alaska Peninsula up through the Bristol Bay area, and then through the YK Delta and Seward Peninsula below 3,000 feet there, 3,000 feet for the western Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us here today is Eric Stevens from the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, GINA for short. And Eric, you frequently come on the show to tell us about these really cool things that we're doing with satellites over Alaska and how we can use these really awesome tools. But I'm thinking all the while there has to be a mad scientist somewhere working on the next cool thing in the satellite laboratory. What is being developed today?
Right. Well, you know, when I was a kid growing up in the boonies in North Dakota there, on Sunday after church, the old people, like my parents and their parents, would gather and have coffee and talk. And I kind of eavesdropped on them a little bit. And the theme of a lot of these conversations seemed to be, well, isn't it amazing what they can do these days, someone would say.
Sure.
And I was thinking, well, I don't know, I was too young.
Right.
Well, now I'm old enough in the weather satellite business.
You can remember when.
The new generation of weather satellites, I'm starting to say, isn't it amazing what they can do these days? Because it's always improving.
Yes.
Maybe an analogy here is like television. Television started in black and white, then it went to color. Analog signal transitioned to digital here a number of years ago. Standard definition becomes high definition. Right. Well, weather satellites are changing too. First weather satellites went up around 1960, not that long ago. No. It's comparatively young science. And every time a new series of satellite is launched, we learn from the past, so the mad scientists decide, well, we could make the next satellite even better in such and such a respect.
Yes.
And now the United States is on the verge of launching, or in progress of launching, a series of new geostationary satellites that are better than ever before. Okay. Let's take a look at some of the previews of what these new satellites can do.
Peek inside the lab here, okay.
Yeah, and so we'll peek in, and here are some mad scientists and mad technicians dressed in bunny suits. This is, believe it or not, this is the business end of a weather satellite under construction in a clean room. You don't want a speck of dust on the lens of a weather satellite's camera. So this is done in a clean environment. They are building a geostationary satellite there.
Oh, cool.
This new generation of satellites, if you had to answer the question, why are these better? Why do we care? Okay. You could answer it with 3 words: faster, better, more. The new generation of satellites are faster than the older ones. The images are sharper, they're better, and there's more spectral channels. We'll talk about that.
Any one of these called Steve Austin? Sounds faster, better, stronger.
Yeah. You know what though? These things cost more than $6 million.
Yeah, I'm sure.
They're pricey, but they are an essential tool for the Weather Service to fulfill its mission of protecting lives and property.
Exactly.
You got to have the tool to do the job, and it helps all of us when we get the accurate forecast, the warning in time, and this is the tool. Faster. On left here, we see what the old generation of satellites could scan in 5 minutes. On the right, that's what you get in 5 minutes, the whole planet, or at least one side of it. So it's faster. That means you can take more images over a given amount of time and make smoother movie loops out of that. Because animating movie loops really helps you highlight a feature that maybe you can't see as well in a single image.
Absolutely does, yep.
Let's zoom into a small piece of real estate like Texas.
Sure.
And we can see here a satellite that has a 1-minute movie loop visible light. You can see thunderstorms boiling there.
Yeah, look at that.
Yeah, the rippling of the top of the thunderstorm. This is a fun movie loop. We're going to be able to see things like this more and more often because of the new satellites being generated. Some things are only evident in animation. So that's faster. Well, what's better? We're able to now have sharper imagery than before. The Japanese have a satellite that uses the same imager that is on the new generation of satellites that America is launching too. An imager, that's just a word for camera. It's the camera on a weather satellite. We have something called the Advanced Baseline Imager.
Sounds important.
ABI. It's important enough, it has an acronym. Everything's an acronym. Well, an ABI-like instrument is here over the Western Pacific, and we can see this color image. This is what a human eye might see if you were riding on the satellite. But it's a little bit fuzzy. With new technology, you can post-process the image taken by the satellite to highlight and sharpen some of the features. So this image here of the Western Pacific then becomes
Whoa.
this image. Thanks to the
That's a big
processing
difference.
techniques, yes, this is the newest technology. So we've got a new satellite that can provide better data than ever before. And on the ground, we can process it better than before as well to really sharpen up the imagery and to give us a better view of the weather than ever before. So faster and better and more. What do we mean by more? Well, on the older generation of satellites, the imager, the camera, had 5 slices of the spectral pie, visible imagery, infrared imagery, something we can't see from the human eye. A lot of different slices of the pie. We're going from 5. The new imager has 16 slices. Each slice has its own relevance. Some are best for volcanic ash, for smoke, for dust, for telling the difference between smoke and dust, which can look similar under some infrared channels, but other ones bring out certain things. All of these 16 bands are important. In fact, some of the mad scientists, they didn't want 16, they wanted 24. There's always more you can do. But that'll be the next generation of satellites. So now we say, isn't it amazing what we can do these days? And you know what? It makes you think, well, what's the future going to be like too? It's so important to be able to know what's going on now in the weather. If you're going to forecast the future, you got to know where things are now. And satellites are the way to see that, especially in Alaska, where we don't have as many observations down on the ground. The satellites fill in the holes.
Yeah, really important stuff. And I love hearing about what we can see right now, but I love thinking about what is possible in the future. It's amazing stuff. And since you paid for it, it's a good time to learn about it. If you'd like, check out the website at www.goes-r.gov. And as I understand, it's a really easy website to use.
Oh yeah, a lot of good information about what these new satellites mean to Americans. And it's the Weather Service's mission to protect lives and property, and this is the tool how to do it.
Cool stuff, Eric. Thanks so much for sharing that with us today, and thank you for joining us right here in Alaska Weather Facts. We'll see you next time. And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine forecast. We'll start off with a look at our ice edge. Not much has changed, and the navigational waters continue to be ice-free. Going down to southeast Alaska for Monday in the inside waters, northerly winds 15 to 20 knots are expected, highest further to the north. Out over the Gulf waters, eastern portions are going to see northerly winds 20 knots, becoming northwesterly 15 as we get further to the north. And then the very north parts of the Gulf, we're going to see westerly winds 10 knots. On Tuesday, flowing the inside waters for the most part is going to be northerly 10 to 15 knots, but going to be coming south by the Lund Canal area 20 knots with gusts to as high as 35 knots. Out over eastern portions of the Gulf, northerly winds 15 knots, becoming westerly and dropping down to 10 knots as we get further to the north. Out over south central Alaska on Monday, float over the Gulf pretty light at a west to southwest wind 10 to 15 knots and 10 knots out of a southwest wind over Prince William Sound area. Strongest winds are going to be west of the Barren Islands. Southerly flow 25 knots is expected with seas up to as high as 5 feet. In Cook Inlet area, southerly winds at 10 to 15 knots. For Tuesday in the Cook Inlet area, northeasterly winds 10 knots increasing to 20 knots and becoming more easterly in southern Cook Inlet. And then west of the Barren Islands, southeasterly winds 30 knots are expected, 25 knots on the east side of the islands. And then as we move up into northern parts of the Gulf, dropping down to 10 knots, and easterly winds 10 knots in the Prince William Sound area. For Monday for the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, around Kodiak Island, south to southwest winds 20 knots are expected. Southerly winds 25 to 30 knots for the Pacific side of the peninsula, and then southeast winds 25 knots on the Bering side. As we move into Tuesday, southerly winds 20 knots for western locations and becoming southwesterly 20 to 25 knots as we get closer to Kodiak Island, and then southerly winds 20 to 25 knots around the island. Seas up to as high as 10 feet, highest south of Kodiak. On Monday for the Aleutian Islands, starting off over the eastern Aleutians, southerly winds 25 knots, becoming westerly 15 knots, and southwest 15 to 20 knots by the central Aleutians, and then becoming southwesterly 25 knots by the western Aleutians with seas up to as high as 10 feet. On Tuesday, flow out by the western Aleutians, becoming westerly 25 knots, seas 10 to 11 feet, southwesterly winds 20 knots for the central Aleutians, and southerly winds 20 knots for the eastern Aleutian Islands. Along the west coast of the state, southeasterly winds are expected, 20 knots up by the Norton Sound area, increasing to 30 knots south of Nunavik Island. By St. Matthew Island, southerly winds 15 knots, and for the Pribilof Islands, westerly winds 15 knots expected. For Tuesday, all areas are going to see southwest winds with the exception of the Norton Sound area where we'll see some southeasterly winds 20 knots there. For those southwest winds along the coast, we are going to see 20 to 25 knots, strongest to the north. And then we're going to see 15 knots by the Pribilof Islands and 20 knots by St. Matthew Island. Along the Arctic coastline on Monday, we're going to see westerly winds 15 knots in areas from Prudhoe Bay east, and that's going to become easterly winds 10 knots, increasing to 20 knots as we move down the northwest coastline, and eventually 25 knots coming out of the Kotzebue Sound area. Through the Bering Strait area, southeasterly winds 20 knots expected. On Tuesday, along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 25 knots all the way through the Kotzebue Sound area, and then becoming southwesterly near the strait at 25 knots as well. For our recap of weather for tonight, we have our low out over the western portion of the Bering Sea, bringing some scattered showers throughout much of the central and western locations of the Bering and down into the Aleutian Islands. Our old frontal system has a new low forming in areas near the Pribilof Islands, bringing more rain to the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula area. Some of that rain is also going to push a little bit further inland from the west coast, encompassing much of the YK Delta area, Seward Peninsula, and up through the Point Hope area. We're going to also start to see some fog by the Norton Sound area extending up the coastline, and a mix of rain and fog all the way along the Arctic coastline as well, with some scattered snow showers in the Brooks Range. However, high pressure is going to dominate mainland Alaska, keeping some fair weather conditions for the south central areas as well as much of the interior and down into the Panhandle. As we look into Monday, that high is going to start to push off a little bit more to the east, still keeping fair weather for the Panhandle, South Central, and much of the interior. However, our rain line is going to start to push a little bit further to the east, starting to make it closer towards the Galena area, but now encompassing much of southwest Alaska and all up the west coast with some areas of fog from the Norton Sound area through the Arctic coastline. Behind this system, we're going to see some rain for much of the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, with more rain for the Alaska Peninsula. On Tuesday, that front will finally make its way over southwest Alaska, bringing rain now for much of the western half of the state to include the Kenai Peninsula and Kodiak Island, as well as some areas of fog up along the Arctic coastline, and scattered rain showers throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutians, but we'll still have fair weather for the Panhandle.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.